Hello, beautiful friends. I am Laurel Bleadon-Maffei with Illuminating Souls, welcoming you to this episode of Sleepy Bedtime Blessings, a podcast designed to help you rest, relax, and fall asleep while you deepen in your connection with your angels. If we're meeting for the first time, I am an angelic practitioner, a spiritual teacher, and an encourager of souls. And I offer one-on-one angel sessions, soul mentoring, and a variety of classes designed to help you connect with your magic and your light and your divine guidance. And my specialty is helping you connect with the angels and guides who are with you always. And so this podcast is designed to be a sacred, sweet space where you get to cozy on up and drift off. You do not have to stay awake for the whole episode, but the angels and I will be with you for the next hour or so that you can take your time, that there's no pressure to fall right asleep. We're going to chat for a little bit, and then I'll bring the angels in for you. And then I'm going to read to you a bedtime story. And I realize it might sound strange that I am creating a podcast that you don't have to pay attention to. But it's because I have been using sleep podcasts for several years now as a part of my own well-being and wellness plan. And I just love them so much. I crawl in the bed at the end of the day and put in my earbuds and choose an episode to listen to. And I find that it really helps create a bridge so that my mind can release everything that had happened during my waking hours and begin to sink in to that place of expansive consciousness. Wherever our consciousness goes while we're asleep. And that's why I am creating this for you. The beautiful energy of the angels is very compatible with sleep. As the higher frequencies come in and the love fills the room, it makes it easier to relax and come into alignment with the waves of love that are here for you. So I invite you to take a deep breath in and out, allowing your body to let go and relax. If you're new to the world of angels, they are divine beings filled with love. And we all have them. That's my belief. And one of the reasons I was guided to begin working with the angels so many years ago was because I had these very tangible experiences of divine love and the recognition of how exalted it felt, so different than anything I had experienced before. For me, divine love feels expansive, and every molecule of beingness that we are is loved. And I know that can be hard to understand from a human perspective. We struggle with the idea of unconditional love. But divine love exists. Truly it does. And when we open up to it, it creates more space for healing and awakening to even more of who we are. You know, as I was preparing to make this recording, I felt a wave of tenderness wash over me. And as an empath and an intuitive, it's not uncommon for me to feel waves of energy. And quite often I will go inside and ask the question, is this mine? And I could feel right away that this tenderness does not belong to me. And that's not uncommon. We pick up energy all the time. And so I asked the angels for some insight and what I could bring to you in tonight's episode to support you. And I pulled an angel card. And you know what card came up? Forgiveness. Now, I know you've worked with forgiveness before. It's impossible to be on the journey of self-growth and not have worked with forgiveness. But the forgiveness the angels are encouraging us to avail ourselves to tonight is forgiving ourselves for the judgments we are placing upon ourselves. I think so many of us have the inner critic that does the cha-cha in our heads. We think we should be somewhere beyond where we are right now. We believe we should have done better or more, that we should have made time to fold the laundry or train for a triathlon or only eat greens and fruits. It sounds so mundane, doesn't it? But we're ever-evolving beings, and so it's part of our archetype to contemplate how we can grow and stretch and become more than we are. But the shadow side is when we use the desire to shift and change to beat ourselves up. You know, I was aware today that it was a low energy day for me. As I record this, I'm in the midst of facilitating a class in vitality, which is always the irony of the work that I do with the angels. They bring forward these themes, and I think I have to embody them perfectly, always forgetting that they bring these themes forward as medicine, not as achievements. So here I am having a low energy day when I'm supposed to be dancing with vitality. And who am I to say that this is not part of the medicine? There's something about these quiet days that give me permission to reconnect with myself and restore and replenish. So it's interesting that the angels brought up forgiveness because It's such a beautiful invitation to give ourselves the spaciousness to be where we are, even if it's not where we want to be. To be here in this moment and allow yourself to receive love, to let the waves of forgiveness pour over you throughout the entire timeline of your life, letting yourself off the hook so that you can be in the preciousness and purity of all that you are. So take a breath in and release, and breathe in the beautiful vibrations of divine forgiveness. Breathe it into every molecule of your body, every thought in your mind, and every emotion in your heart. You don't even need to know what is up for forgiveness. Just allow the angels to bring this precious vibration to you, because you know what? The angels do not judge you, nor does God. You are a divine being having a human experience. And sometimes we have a very, very, very human experience. And our imperfections yell at us in the mirror. And the judgments start doing the tango. And this is why the angels are bringing forward the invitation for you to receive forgiveness. Not because you need forgiveness for anything in the greater universe, but the forgiveness is for you and the judgments you have heaped upon yourself. So you breathe in and you receive this beautiful, clear, healing energy from your angels who love you. And I'm going to do a prayer to invite them in, even though they are already here. So beautiful angels on high, I ask that you join us here, and I am grateful for the invitation that you bring forward for us to be here with you now. Angels, I ask that you infuse this broadcast with love so that everyone who hears this message will know that they are loved and they are precious. Angels, I ask that you clear away the judgments that weigh us down and keep us mired in places and states of consciousness we no longer wish to be. And we ask that you bring to us the waves of forgiveness and healing in a way that we can metabolize it so that we come into a greater lightness of spirit. And dear ones, just take a big breath in and release, and allow your angels to bring to you an infusion of light that will help you to deepen in your awareness of who you truly are as a precious beloved of God. The angels are coming in to help relieve you of that which feels like a burden to you. Take a breath in and out and feel yourself resting into the love of your angels. Your angels are aware of everything that has been going on for you. They know what is in your heart. They know your worries. They know your dreams. They know your gifts. And they know your challenges. And they are here with you in every breath, every moment. Take a breath in and allow yourself to come into the wholeness of you. As you discover who you truly are as a beloved of this universe. There is magic in you. You are a bringer of light. You are one who has come here to infuse this world with more love. So you let yourself rest, because there is beauty waiting for you when you awaken in the morning. That new dreams are being seeded in your name. Sparks of inspiration are coming to you. The angels love to say, you do a little and we'll do a lot. So you leave the heavy lifting to the angels tonight and you cozy up. Pull your blankets up just so. And you rest. Drift off to rest knowing that you are cherished and you are precious. And we are so grateful to be with you now. And while you rest, the angels will watch over you. And I'm going to read to you. And tonight, I'm going to read to you the 4th installment from Little Women from Louisa May Alcott. So in the previous installments, we have met the 4 sisters. There's Amy and Beth and Jo and Meg. Each one has their own personality and way of seeing the world. And the boy who lives next door to them is Laurie. And Jo has just invited herself over to visit Laurie, who isn't feeling well. It sounds like he might have a cold. And she has asked Marmee, their mother, if she could go and visit Laurie. And so this is where we pick up. So the doorbell has rung. He hears his servants going to open the door and invite in Jo. All right, show her up. It's Miss Jo, said Laurie, going to the door of his little parlor to meet Jo, who appeared looking rosy and quite at ease, with a covered dish in one hand and Beth's 3 kittens in the other. Here I am, bag and baggage, she said briskly. Mother sent her love and was glad if I could do anything for you. Meg wanted me to bring some of her blancmange. She makes it very nicely, and Beth thought her cats would be comforting. I knew you'd laugh at them, but I couldn't refuse. She was so anxious to do something. It so happened that Beth's funny loan was just the thing, for in laughing over the kits, Laurie forgot his bashfulness and grew sociable at once. That one looks too pretty to eat, he said, smiling with pleasure as Jo uncovered the dish and showed the blancmange surrounded by a garland of green leaves and the scarlet flowers of Amy's pet geranium. It isn't anything, only they all felt kindly and wanted to show it. Tell the girl to put it away for your tea. It's so simple you can eat it, and being soft, it will slip down without hurting your sore throat. What a cozy room this is. Well, it might be, if it was kept nice, But the maids are lazy and I don't know how to make them mind. It worries me though. I'll write it up in 2 minutes, for it only needs to have the hearth brushed and the things made straight on the mantelpiece, and the books put here and the bottles there, and your sofa turned from the light, and the pillows plumped up a bit. Now then, you're fixed. And so he was, for as she laughed and talked, Joe had whisked things into place and given a different air to the room. Laurie watched her in respectful silence, and when she beckoned him to his sofa, he sat down with a sigh of satisfaction, saying gratefully, "How kind you are. Yes, that's what it wanted. Now please take the big chair and let me do something to amuse my company." "No, I came to amuse you. Shall I read aloud?" And Joe looked affectionately toward some inviting books nearby. "Thank you. I've read all of those, and if you don't mind, I'd rather talk," answered Laurie. "Not a bit. I'll talk all day if only you'll set me going. Beth says I never know when to stop." "Is Beth the rosy one who stays at home a good deal and sometimes goes out with a little basket?" asked Laurie with interest. "Yes, that's Beth. She's my girl, and a regular good one she is too. The pretty one is Meg, and the curly-haired one is Amy, I believe." "How did you find that out?" Laurie colored up, but answered frankly, "Why, you see, I often hear you calling to one another, and when I'm up alone here, I can't help looking over at your house. You always seem to be having such good times. I beg your pardon for being so rude, but sometimes you forget to put down the curtain at the window where the flowers are, and when the lamps are lighted, it's like looking at a picture to see the fire and you all around the table with your mother. Her face is right opposite, and it looks so sweet behind the flowers. I can't help watching it. I haven't got any mother, you know." And Laurie poked the fire to hide a little twitching of the lips that he could not control. The solitary, hungry look in his eyes went straight to Joe's warm heart. She had been so simply taught that there was no nonsense in her head, and at 15 she was as innocent and frank as any child. Laurie was sick and lonely, and feeling how rich she was in home and happiness, she gladly tried to share it with him. Her face was very friendly and her sharp voice unusually gentle as she said, "We'll never draw that curtain any more, and I give you leave to look as much as you like. I just wish, though, instead of peeping, you'd come over and see us. Mother is so splendid she'd do you heaps of good, and Beth would sing to you if I begged her to, and Amy would dance. Meg and I would make you laugh over our funny stage properties, and we'd have jolly times. Wouldn't your grandpa let you?" "I think he would if your mother asked him. He's very kind, though he does not look so, and he lets me do what I like, pretty much. Only he's afraid I might be a bother to strangers," began Laurie, brightening more and more. "We're not strangers, we're neighbors, and you needn't think you'd be a bother. We want to know you, and I've been trying to do it ever so long. We haven't been here a great while, you know, but we have got acquainted with all our neighbors but you. You see, Grandpa lives among his books and doesn't mind much what happens outside. Mr. Brooke, my tutor, doesn't stay here, you know, and I have no one to go about with me, so I just stop at home and get on as I can. That's bad. You ought to make an effort and go visiting everywhere you are asked, and then you'll have plenty of friends and pleasant places to go. Never mind being bashful. It won't last long if you keep going." Laurie turned red again, but wasn't offended at being accused of bashfulness, for there was so much goodwill in Joe it was impossible not to take her blunt speeches as kindly as they were meant. "Do you like your school?" asked the boy, changing the subject after a little pause, during which he stared at the fire, and Joe looked about her well pleased. Don't go to school. I go to wait on my great aunt, and dear cross old soul she is too, answered Joe. Laurie opened his mouth to ask another question, but remembered just in time that it wasn't manners to make too many inquiries into people's affairs. He shut it again and looked uncomfortable. Joe liked his good breeding and didn't mind having a laugh at Aunt March, so she gave him a lively description of the fidgety old lady, her fat poodle, the parrot that talked Spanish, and the library where she reveled. Laurie enjoyed that immensely, and when she told about the prim old gentleman who came once to woo Aunt March, and in the middle of a fine speech, how Pole had tweaked his wig off to his great dismay, the boy lay back and laughed until the tears ran down his cheeks, and a maid popped her head in to see what was the matter. "Oh, that does me no end of good. Tell on, please," he said, taking his face out of the sofa cushion, red and shining with merriment. Much elated with her success, Joe did tell on about all their plays and plans, their hopes and fears for father, and the most interesting events of the little world in which the sisters lived. Then they got to talking about books, and to Joe's delight she found that Laurie loved them as well as she did, and had read even more than herself. "If you like them so much, come down and see ours. Grandfather is out, so you needn't be afraid," said Laurie, getting up. "I'm not afraid of anything," returned Joe with a toss of the head. "I don't believe you are," exclaimed the boy, looking at her with much admiration, though he privately thought she would have good reason to be a trifle afraid of the old gentleman if she met him in some of his moods. The atmosphere of the whole house being summer-like, Laurie led the way from room to room, letting Joe stop to examine whatever struck her fancy. And so at last they came to the library, where she clapped her hands and pranced as she always did when especially delighted. It was lined with books, and now there were pictures and statues and distracting little cabinets full of coins and curiosities, and sleepy hollow chairs and queer tables and bronzes, and best of all, a great open fireplace with quaint tiles all around it. "What richness," sighed Joe, sinking into the depth of a velour chair and gazing about her with an air of intense satisfaction. "Theodore Lawrence, you ought to be the happiest boy in the world," she added impressively. "A fellow can't live on books," said Laurie, shaking his head as he perched on a table opposite. Before he could more, a bell rang, and Joe flew up, exclaiming with alarm, "Mercy me, it's your grandpa." "Well, what if it is? You're not afraid of anything, you know," returned the boy, looking wicked. "Well, I think I'm a little bit afraid of him, but I don't know why I should be. Marmee said I might come, and I don't think you're any of the worse for it," said Joe, composing herself, though she kept her eyes on the door. "I'm a great deal better for it, and ever so much obliged. I'm only afraid you are very tired of talking to me. It was so pleasant I couldn't bear to stop," said Laurie gratefully. "The doctor to see you, sir," and the maid beckoned as she spoke. "Would you mind if I left you for a minute? I suppose I must see him," said Laurie. "Don't mind me, I'm happy as a cricket here," answered Joe. Laurie went away, and his guest amused herself in her own way. She was standing before a fine portrait of the old gentleman when the door opened again, and without turning, she said decidedly, "I'm sure now that I shouldn't be afraid of him, for he's got kind eyes, though his mouth is grim, and he looks as if he has had a tremendous will of his own. He isn't as handsome as my grandfather, but I like him." "Well, thank you, ma'am," said a gruff voice behind her, and there, to her great dismay, stood old Mr. Lawrence. Poor Jo blushed till she couldn't blush any redder, and her heart began to beat uncomfortably fast as she thought what she had said. For a minute, a wild desire to run away possessed her, but that was cowardly and the girls would laugh at her, so she resolved to stay and get out of the scrape as she could. A second look showed her that the living eyes under the bushy eyebrows were kinder even than the painted ones, and there was a sly twinkle in them which lessened her fear a good deal. The gruff voice was gruffer than ever, as the old gentleman said abruptly after the dreadful pause, "So you're not afraid of me, eh?" "Not much, sir." "And you don't think me as handsome as your grandfather?" "Not quite, sir." "And I've got a tremendous will, have I?" "I only said that I thought so." "But you like me in spite of it?" "Yes, I do, sir." That answer pleased the old gentleman. He gave a short laugh, shook hands with her, and putting his finger under her chin, turned up her face, examined it gravely, and let it go, saying with a nod, "You've got your grandfather's spirit, if you haven't his face. He was a fine man, my dear, but what is better, he was a brave and honest one, and I was proud to be his friend." "Thank you, sir." And Jo was quite comfortable after that, for it suited her exactly. "What have you been doing to this boy of mine, eh?" was the next question sharply put. "Only trying to be neighborly, sir," and Jo told how her visit came about. "You think he needs cheering up a bit, do you?" "Yes, sir. He seems a little lonely, and young folks would do him good perhaps. We are only girls, but we should be glad to help if we could, for we don't forget the splendid Christmas presents you sent us," said Jo eagerly. "That was the boy's affair. How's the poor woman?" "Doing nicely, sir." And off went Jo, talking very fast, as she told all about the Hummels, in whom her mother had interested richer friends than they were. Just her father's way of doing good. "I shall come and see your mother some fine day. Tell her so." "There's the tea bell. We have it early on the boy's account. Come down and go on being neighborly." "If you would like to have me, sir." "Shouldn't ask you if I didn't," and Mr. Lawrence offered her his arm with old-fashioned courtesy. What would Meg say to this, thought Jo, as she was marched away while her eyes danced with fun as she imagined herself telling the story at home. "Hey, why, what the dickens has come to the fellow?" said the old gentleman as Laurie came running downstairs and brought up with a start of surprise at the astounding sight of Jo, arm in arm, with his redoubtable grandfather. "I didn't know you'd come, sir," he began as Jo gave him a triumphant little glance. "That's evident by the way you rack it downstairs. Come to your tea, sir, and behave like a gentleman." And having pulled the boy's hair by way of caress, Mr. Lawrence walked on, while Laurie went through a series of comic evolutions behind their backs, which nearly produced an explosion of laughter from Jo. The old gentleman did not say much as he drank his 4 cups of tea, but he watched the young people, who soon chatted away like old friends, and the change in his grandson did not escape him. There was color, light, and life in the boy's face now, vivacity in his manner, and genuine merriment in his laugh. "She's right. The lad is lonely. I'll see what these girls can do for him," thought Mr. Lawrence as he looked and listened. He liked Jo, for her odd, blunt way suited him, and she seemed to understand the boy almost as well as if she had been one herself. If the Lawrences had been what Jo called prim and poky, she would not have gotten on at all, for such people always made her shy and awkward. But finding them free and easy, she was so herself and made a good impression. When they rose, she proposed to go, but Laurie said he had something more to show her, and took her away to the conservatory, which had been lighted for her benefit. It seemed quite fairy-like to Jo as she went up and down the walks, enjoying the blooming walls on either side, the soft light, the damp, sweet air, and the wonderful vines and trees that hung about her, while her new friend cut the finest flowers till his hands were full. Then he tied them up, saying, with the happy look Jo liked to see, "Please give these to your mother, and tell her I like the medicine she sent me very much." They found Mr. Lawrence standing before the fire in the great drawing room, but Jo's attention was entirely absorbed by a grand piano which stood open. "Do you play?" she asked, turning to Laurie with a respectful expression. "Sometimes," he answered modestly. "Oh, please do now. I want to hear it so I can tell Beth." "Won't you first?" "Don't know how. Too stupid to learn, but I love music dearly." So Laurie played and Jo listened, with her nose luxuriously buried in a heliotrope and tea roses. Her respect and regard for the Lawrence boy increased very much, for he played remarkably well and didn't put on any airs. She wished Beth could hear him, but she did not say so, only praised him till he was quite abashed, and his grandfather came to his rescue. That will do, young lady. Too many sugar plums are not good for him. His music isn't bad, but I hope he will do as well in important things. Going? Well, I'm much obliged to you, and I hope you'll come again. My respects to your mother. Good night, Dr. Jo." He shook hands kindly, but looked as if something did not please him. When they got into the hall, Jo asked Laurie if she had said something amiss. He shook his head. "No, it was me. He doesn't like to hear me play." "Why not?" "I'll tell you some day. John is going home with you, as I can't." "No need of that. I'm not a young lady, and it's only a step. Take care of yourself, won't you?" "Yes, but you'll come again, I hope." "If you promise to come and see us after you are well." "I will. Good night, Laurie." "Good night, Jo. Good night." When all the afternoon's adventures had been told, the family felt inclined to go visiting in a body, for each found something very attractive in the big house on the other side of the hedge. Mrs. March wanted to talk of her father with the old man who had not forgotten him. Meg longed to walk in the conservatory. Beth sighed for the grand piano, and Amy was eager to see the fine pictures and statues. "Mother, why didn't Mr. Lawrence like to have Laurie play?" asked Jo, who was of an inquiring disposition. "I'm not sure, but I think it was because his son, Laurie's father, married an Italian lady, a musician, which displeased the old man, who was very proud. The lady was good and lovely and accomplished, but he did not like her, and never saw his son after he married. They both died when Laurie was a little child, and then his grandfather took him home. I fancy the boy who was born in Italy is not very strong, and the old man is afraid of losing him, which makes him so careful. Laurie comes naturally by his love of music, for he is like his mother, and I dare say his grandfather fears that he may want to be a musician. At any rate, his skill reminds him of the woman he did not like, and so he glowered, as Jo said. "Dear me, how romantic!" exclaimed Meg. "How silly," said Jo. "Let him be a musician if he wants to, and not plague his life out sending him to college when he hates to go." "That's why he has such handsome black eyes and pretty manners, I suppose. Italians are always nice," said Meg, who was a little sentimental. "What do you know about his eyes and his manners? You've never spoken to him, hardly," cried Jo, who was not sentimental. "I saw him at the party, and what you tell shows that he knows how to behave. That was a nice little speech about the medicine Mother sent him. He meant the blancmange, I suppose. How stupid you are, child. He meant you, of course. Did he? And Jo opened her eyes as if it had never occurred to her before. I never saw such a girl. You don't know a compliment when you get it, said Meg with the air of a young lady who knew all about the matter. I think they are great nonsense, and I thank you not to be silly and spoil my fun. Laurie's a nice boy and I like him, and I won't have any sentimental stuff about compliments and such rubbish. We'll all be good to him because he hasn't got any mother, and he may come over and see us, mayn't he, Marmee? Yes, Jo, your little friend is very welcome, and I hope Meg will remember that children should be children as long as they can. I don't call myself a child, and I'm not in my teens yet, observed Amy. What do you say, Beth? I was thinking about our Pilgrim's Progress, answered Beth, who had not heard a word. How we got out of the slough and through the wicket gate by resolving to be good, and up the steep hill by trying, and that maybe the house over there full of splendid things is going to be our Palace Beautiful. We have got to get by the lions first, said Jo, as if she rather liked the prospect. Chapter 6. Beth Finds the Palace Beautiful. The big house did prove a palace beautiful, though it took some time for all to get in, and Beth found it very hard to pass the lions. Old Mr. Lawrence was the biggest one, but after he had called, said something funny or kind to each one of the girls, and talked over old times with their mother, nobody felt much afraid of him except timid Beth. The other lion was the fact that they were poor and Laurie rich, for this made them shy of accepting favors which they could not return. But after a while they found that he considered them the benefactors. It could not do enough to show how grateful he was for Mrs. March's motherly welcome, their cheerful society, and the comfort he took in that humble home of theirs. So they soon forgot their pride and interchanged kindnesses without stopping to think which was the greater. All sorts of pleasant things happened about that time, for the new friendship flourished like grass in spring. Everyone liked Laurie, and he privately informed his tutor that the Marches were regularly splendid girls, with the delightful enthusiasm of youth. They took the solitary boy into their midst, and made much of him, and he found something very charming in the innocent companionship of these simple-hearted girls. Never having known mother or sisters, he was quick to feel the influences they brought about him, and their busy, lively ways made him ashamed of the indolent life he led. He was tired of books and found people so interesting now that Mr. Brooke was obliged to make very unsatisfactory reports, for Laurie was always playing truant and running over to the Marches. Never mind. Let him take a holiday and make it up afterward, said the old gentleman. The good lady next door says he is studying too hard and needs young society, amusement, and exercise. I suspect she's right, and that I've been coddling the fellow as if I'd been his grandmother. Let him do what he likes as long as he is happy. He can't get into mischief in that little nunnery over there, and Mrs. March is doing more for him than we can. What good times they had, to be sure. Such plays and tableaux, such sleigh rides and skating frolics, such pleasant evenings in the old parlor, and now and then such gay little parties at the great house. Meg could walk in the conservatory whenever she liked and revel in bouquets. Jo browsed over the new library voraciously and convulsed the old gentleman with her criticisms. Amy copied pictures and enjoyed beauty to her heart's content, and Laurie played Lord of the Manor in the most delightful style. But Beth, though yearning for the grand piano, could not pluck up the courage to go to the mansion of bliss, as Meg called it. She went once with Joe, but the old gentleman, not being aware of her infirmity, stared at her so hard from under his heavy eyebrows and said, "Hey," so loud that he frightened her so much that her feet chattered on the floor. She never told her mother, and she ran away, declaring she would never go there any more, not even for the dear piano. No persuasions or enticements could overcome her fear, till the fact coming to Mr. Lawrence's ear in some mysterious way, he set about mending matters. During one of the brief calls he made, he artfully led the conversation to music, and talked away about great singers whom he had seen, fine organs he had heard, and told such charming anecdotes that Beth found it impossible to stay in her distant corner, but crept nearer and nearer as if fascinated. At the back of his chair she stopped and stood listening with her great eyes wide open and her cheeks red with excitement of this unusual performance. Taking no more notice of her than if she had been a fly, Mr. Lawrence talked on about Laurie's lessons and teachers, and presently, as if the idea had just occurred to him, he said to Mrs. March, "The boy neglects his music now, and I'm glad of it, for he was getting too fond of it. But the piano suffers for want of use. Wouldn't some of your girls like to run over and practice on it now and then, just to keep it in tune, you know, ma'am?" Beth took a step forward and pressed her hands tightly together to keep from clapping them, for this was an irresistible temptation, and the thought of practicing on that splendid instrument quite took her breath away. Before Mrs. March could reply, Mr. Lawrence went on with an odd little nod and smile. "They needn't see or speak to anyone, but run in at any time, for I am shut up in my study at the other end of the house. Laurie is out a great deal, and the servants are never near the drawing room after 9 o'clock. Here he rose, as if going, and Beth made up her mind to speak, for that last arrangement left nothing to be desired. "Please tell the young ladies what I say, and if they don't care to come, why, never mind." Here a little hand slipped into his, and Beth looked up at him with a face full of gratitude, as she said in her earnest yet timid way, "Oh, sir, they do care very, very much." "Are you the musical girl?" he asked without any startling hey, as he looked down at her very kindly. "I'm Beth. I love it dearly, and I'll come if you're quite sure nobody will hear me and be disturbed," she added, fearing to be rude and trembling at her own boldness as she spoke. "Not a soul, my dear. The house is half empty the day, so come and drum away as much as you like, and I shall be obliged to you." "How kind you are, sir." Beth blushed like a rose under the friendly look he wore, but she was not frightened now, and gave the hand a grateful squeeze because she had no words to thank him for the precious gift he had given her. The old gentleman softly stroked the hair off her forehead, and stooping down, he kissed her, saying in a tone very few people ever heard, "I had a little girl once, with eyes like these. God bless you, my dear. Good day, madam." And away he went in a great hurry. Beth had a rapture with her mother, and then rushed up to impart the glorious news to her family of invalids as the girls were not home. How blithely she sang that evening, and how they all laughed at her because she woke Amy in the night by playing the piano on her face in her sleep. Next day, having seen both the old and young gentlemen out of the house, Beth, after 2 or 3 retreats, fairly got in the side door and made her way as noiselessly as any mouse to the drawing room where her idols stood. Quite by accident, of course, some pretty easy music lay on the piano, and with trembling fingers and frequent stops to listen and look about, Beth at last touched the grand instrument, and straightway forgot her fear herself and everything else but the unspeakable delight which the music gave her, for it was like the voice of a beloved friend. She stayed till Hannah came to get her home to dinner, but she had no appetite, and could only sit and smile upon everyone in a general state of beatitude. After that, the little brown hood slipped through the hedge nearly every day, and the great drawing-room was haunted by a tuneful spirit that came and went unseen. She never knew that Mr. Lawrence opened his study door to hear the old-fashioned airs he liked. She never saw Laurie mount guard in the hall to warn the servants away. She never suspected that the exercise books and new songs which she found in the rack were put there for her special benefit. And when he talked to her about music at home, she only thought how kind he was to tell things that helped her so much. So she enjoyed herself heartily, and found, what isn't always the case, that her granted wish was all she had hoped. Perhaps it was because she was so grateful for this blessing that a greater was given her. At any rate, she deserved both. "Mother, I'm going to work Mr. Lawrence a pair of slippers. He is so kind to me. I must thank him, and I don't know any other way. Can I do it?" asked Beth, a few weeks after that eventful call of his. "Yes, dear, it will please him very much, and be a nice way of thanking him. The girls will help you about them, and I will pay for the making up," replied Mrs. March, who took peculiar pleasure in granting Beth's requests, because she so seldom asked for anything for herself. After many serious discussions with Meg and Joe, the pattern was chosen, the materials bought, and the slippers begun. A cluster of grave yet cheerful pansies on a deeper purple ground was pronounced very appropriate and pretty, and Beth worked away early and late, with occasional lifts over hard parts. She was a nimble little needlewoman, and they were finished before anyone got tired of them. Then she wrote a short, simple note, and with Laurie's help, got them smuggled into the study table one morning before the old gentleman was up. When this excitement was over, Beth waited to see what would happen. All day passed, and a part of the next before any acknowledgment arrived, and she was beginning to fear that she had offended her crotchety friend. On the afternoon of the second day, she went out to do an errand and give poor Joanna, the invalid doll, her daily exercise. As she came up the street on her return, she saw 4 heads popping in and out of the parlor windows, and the moment they saw her, several hands were waved and several joyful voices screamed, "Here's a letter from the old gentleman. Come quick and read it." "Oh, Beth, he sent you," began Amy, gesticulating with unseemly energy, but she got no further, for Joe quenched her by slamming down the window. Beth hurried on in a flutter of suspense. At the door, her sister seized and bore her to the parlor in a triumphant procession, all pointing and all saying at once, "Look there, look there." Beth did look, and turned pale with delight and surprise, for there stood a little cabinet piano, with a letter lying on the glossy lid, directed like a signboard to Miss Elizabeth March. "For me?" gasped Beth, holding on to Joe and feeling as if she should tumble down. It was such an overwhelming thing altogether. "Yes, all for you, my precious. Isn't it splendid of him? Don't you think he's the dearest old man in the world? Here's the key in the letter. We didn't open it, but we're dying to know what he says," cried Joe, hugging her sister and offering the note. "You read it. I can't. I feel so queer. Oh, it's too lovely." And Beth hid her face in Joe's apron, quite upset by her present. Jo opened the paper and began to laugh, for the first words she saw were, "Miss Smart, dear Madam." "How nice it sounds. I wish someone would write to me so," said Amy, who thought the old-fashioned address very elegant. "I have had many pairs of slippers in my life, but I never had any that suited me so well as yours," continues Jo. "Heartsease is my favorite flower, and these will always remind me of the gentle giver. I like to pay my debts, so I know you will allow the old gentleman to send you something which once belonged to the little granddaughter he lost. With hearty thanks and best wishes, I remain your grateful friend and humble servant, James Lawrence." There, Beth, that's an honor to be proud of, I'm sure. Laurie told me how fond Mr. Lawrence used to be of the child who died, and how he kept all her little things carefully. Just think, he's given you her piano. That comes of having big blue eyes and loving music, said Jo, trying to soothe Beth, who trembled and looked more excited than she'd ever looked before. "See the cunning brackets to hold candles, and the nice green silk puckered up with a gold rose in the middle, and the pretty rack and stool all complete," added Meg, opening the instrument and displaying its beauties. "Your humble servant, James Lawrence. Only think of his writing that to you. I'll tell the girls. They'll think it splendid," said Amy, much impressed by the note. "Try it, honey. Let's hear the sound of the baby piano," said Hannah, who always took a share in the family's joys and sorrows. So Beth tried it, and everyone pronounced it was the most remarkable piano ever heard. It had evidently been newly tuned and put in apple pie order, but perfect as it was, I think the real charm lay in the happiest of all happy faces, which leaned over it as Beth lovingly touched the beautiful black and white keys and pressed the bright pedals. "You'll have to go and thank him," said Jo, by way of joke, for the idea of the child's really going never entered her head. "Yes, I mean to. I guess I'll go there now before I get frightened thinking about it." And to the utter amazement of the assembled family, Beth walked deliberately down the garden, through the hedge, and in the Lawrence's door. And we'll go ahead and stop there. Isn't that wonderful? Oh, I just love this story. So I invite you to have sweet dreams and know that this world is filled with kindness. Whatever your version of the piano is, I hope the universe brings it to you in just a wonderful, unexpected way. So you sleep well and know that you are loved and you are precious. Sweet dreams. We'll connect again soon.